What's going on, guys? Today I wanted to share a few articles with you about data centers, and we're also going to touch back on the subject of the Ring doorbell, and I have a couple articles on that. Now, what's going on in the US and likely in other countries as well, but even more so in the US by far, as we're going to see today, is data centers are basically the developers that are involved using third parties and shell companies in some cases, according to these articles, to try and buy farmland. So they're seeking out for these AI data centers farmland, and part of the reason for that, and we're also going to look at how policy seems to be, in a way, putting farmers in a position where they're more likely to sell. Basically, data center developers are pressuring farmers, and they're doing this using a variety of tactics, but mostly persistence. It looks like there's a big reason that they would love to have this rural land, and part of that is the zoning, the lack of the regulations, and also the more plentiful water supply, things that is needed for a data center. But farmers, not all of them are buying into this, even when they're being offered exorbitant amounts of money for their farmland, as we're going to see. So the projected amount of data center increases is supposed to be 165% increase by 2030. And globally, they say 40,000 acres are going to be needed for this data center growth in just the next 5 years. See, as it mentions here, Silicon Valley executives believe that rural areas are more attractive due to the weak zoning protections and cheap power and abundant water. Well, as I had covered not too long ago, pretty much everyone has their utility, their electric bills going up because of data centers in their area. So if you have data centers that are in your area, it is highly likely that your electric bill is going to increase. And I'll just cite Bloomberg on this. They mentioned 267% increase people are seeing just because they live in an area where data centers are sucking up all of the power. And they're not actually paying their way. Think about this. I want you to consider this. So these data centers are using so much electricity that the people around them have to pay for it. But not only this, take this also into consideration. Not only are you going to pay a higher electric bill if you allow data centers to be built in your vicinity, you're also going to actually have to still pay that AI company that you are helping to subsidize their power usage. You still have to pay for their product. I think if you're paying for their electric bill, they should be giving you that damn product for free. That's my take. We're going to get into this. So this shows a couple different farmers and talks about what has happened. She was offered $33 million for her 650 acres. And several of her neighbors also received similar offers. Now, another thing about this is they're using non-disclosure agreements, and they're silencing even those who work in local governments about this. They're also using third parties and shell companies, according to some articles. So they're not actually saying, we want to buy your farm to make a data center. What they're doing is, with these shell companies, they are knocking and asking the farmer to sign a non-disclosure agreement just to sell their farm. So to me, if anyone asks you if you have a farm, don't sell it if you're not allowed to know who the buyer is. You need to know. You deserve that information. And you definitely shouldn't have to sign a non-disclosure agreement just to find out who's buying your farm and what they're going to do with your land. A lot of these farms have been passed down to families over generations. And look at how things are just lining up for these big tech executives. It just so happens that things such as the tariffs have hurt farmers so much that it has made their economy fragile, that it has made them more desperate for financial help. And just so happens that the policies that are in place just happen to be making farmers a bit poorer, not only in the increases in costs, which, according to some citations, over 95% of the tariffs are actually being paid by Americans. The tariffs that are so-called going to be paid by other countries, well, according to various reports, it's over 95% they found in some cases are paid by Americans. So the farmers are paying more for their prices, more for their grain, more for all of the things they need to run their farm. Not only that, but the tariffs are also making it difficult to find buyers for their farm products. And then you have these data center Silicon Valley executives stepping in during a very vulnerable time that these farmers are in and saying, hey, we're going to offer you a ton of money over the value of your farm. But you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You can't know who the buyer is until you agree, and you must sign this non-disclosure agreement. Well, these farmers aren't taking it, and it mentions it right here. So the National Farmers Union issued a statement after the Supreme Court blocked the tariffs, said that many family farmers have already felt the consequences of these tariffs, which raised their costs, disrupted their sales, because as we know, with this trade war going on, the farmers that traditionally had reliable buyers overseas for their products no longer do because of the trade war and the tariffs. The tariffs have caused other countries to boycott U.S. goods. It's really a disaster for these farmers and many other business owners, where not everyone can get the tariff exemption, but a lot of times what they've actually found in some studies, and you can look this up for yourself, that Republican donors tend to be more likely to get tariff exemptions. And that happened, I do want to make very clear, that report came out before the current administration. So I am not blaming the current administration solely for this. It seems that tariffs, I guess, maybe are a Republican platform. I'm not really sure. But I do know that it mentions how the tariffs have hurt these farmers, put them in such a vulnerable position that they would be more likely to sell their farms. So obviously some have, but many are pushing back. Now this article comes from NBC over here. How the non-disclosure agreements are keeping these data center details hidden from Americans. They're using secrecy agreements with local governments to keep communities in the dark by who is building in their backyards. And a lot of people who live near these data centers say they hear a constant whirring sound, and I'm sure that's like cooling fans and everything else that's running in those data centers. But I imagine that might drive you a little mad if you live near that. And some of these farmers also mention that they have concerns about their neighbors. If they sell their farm, they don't want to, not have their communities. They believe in their communities. They do not want to sell their farm to some Silicon Valley executive so he can make an AI data center, which likely is collecting data, possibly surveillance related. You don't really know. And you do have to question, what is the rush, as this article says? Why does the U.S. have so many more data centers than the rest of the world? And you hear so much about China and surveillance. Well, they only have 365 according to this article. And this is just according to this article that the U.S. has 10 times more. In fact, according to this article, it says that the U.S. has more data centers than the next 14 countries combined. That's right. 14 countries combined. The U.S. has more. Do you think this might have something to do with surveillance? I don't know. What do you think? You tell me. So this article goes into the fact that the U.S. is just running wild with data center building. And obviously, listen, I get it. There is an AI revolution. There is competition worldwide. So yes, there is a motivation to build many data centers. So I get it. But I'm not very comfortable with it. Especially given that people are having to pay higher bills just to help enrich billionaires and Silicon Valley executives. And then they're also kept in the dark about this. They're kept in the dark. And here you can see a world map where you can see the number of data centers. These AI data centers, look how many are in the U.S. Land of the free, right? Well, Land of the Free has 3,960. The rest of the world, as you can see, only have a few hundred each at most. At most, they have hundreds. But for some reason, massive amount. And we do know that the current economy, a lot of it is kind of being held up in a big way. At least a large percentage of the markets are being held up by AI companies. At the same time, we're seeing tariffs that are actually destroying businesses, traditional businesses. It's almost like it feels like there's being a transition or almost a transfer of economic power and growth into these big companies that are associated with AI and surveillance, in my opinion, at least, in my personal opinion. Now let's take a look at the next article. There is actually a reward out there. If you can break free of Ring doorbell servers, you could earn 5 figures. So what this contest offers is if you can get a Ring doorbell to no longer upload the video to the cloud and instead have it locally hosted, only streaming to the owner's computers. Now they may allow networking in some way, but there's always different things that are in the way of this. It's not just a straightforward firewall change or something like that. You have certificates to worry about, and you have all of the things that the security infrastructure of Ring doorbell depends upon that has to be hacked, so to speak. So $10,000 up front, and then matching community donations for 10,000 for eligible submissions. Now, they're not going to be handing out this reward for just any vulnerability. They want to actually have the Ring camera actually run locally. I think this is an awesome contest, really. Such a great thing, a motivation. You know how we have routers that can be, flashed with OpenWRT, so open source router firmware, things like that. Well, imagine if you could have a Ring doorbell that would run more open source firmware, something that you could control and host locally. I mean, think about this. Ring doorbell owners not only have to pay for the doorbell, then they also have to pay a monthly subscription fee. And as we saw with the recent missing person story where they said there was no footage from Nancy Guthrie's doorbell because she didn't pay her bill, she just didn't get access to it. They found the footage on the servers for the Google Nest. Somehow, something that didn't exist showed up about a week later, just conveniently existed. But if you own a doorbell camera from one of these companies, you are not allowed to have access to the surveillance that is being done on your neighbors, that is being done on your community, unless you not only buy that doorbell camera, you also have to pay the monthly fee, or you're cut off from access to your own surveillance system in your own home. Isn't that funny? Now, this obviously relates to right to repair, which is a huge effort to try and bring back the ability of repairability in our devices, basically bring back ownership. When you think about it, people who have doorbell cameras, if you cannot locally host it, if you cannot repair it, if you cannot control it without paying a monthly fee, do you really own it? I would say there's an argument there. Now, I do want to bring this up. I want to be fair to Ring Doorbell and Amazon because I'm always here trying to follow up with an update that is in their favor too. So in my last video, I talked about one of their partnerships with Flock Safety, which is that mass surveillance network that is basically license plate readers and also now Condor cameras that actually track people and are actually moving cameras. They track people's movements, and they basically, you can look at Ben Jordan's videos and see my previous videos where I show you clips from his videos as well as my own thoughts and takes on it. So they say they scrapped the partnership with Flock Safety. Gotta commend them for that if it is entirely accurate. Now, is it completely scrapped, or could there be something else behind the curtain? I don't know, but I will give them credit for scrapping the partnership with Flock Safety, because you're already buying your doorbell camera. You're already paying a monthly fee just to have access to your own surveillance of your own community, your own neighbors. who aren't always happy about it. I actually had a neighbor who got in a fight with another neighbor because one of his cameras was pointed in the other guy's window. So he wasn't quite happy about that. And, not all neighbors are going to appreciate it if they have a house across from you and you have a camera pointed right at their kids while they're playing or something like that. That's kind of creepy. So, looks like they scrapped that partnership. So, hey, gotta give it to them. I commend Amazon for this one, as long as it's true and fully accurate. Now, let's take a little look on this website. I just discovered this one, stateofsurveillance.org. Pretty cool, actually. So now we're looking at the timeline for 2026. Ring police access with facial recognition. That's what they're saying. Now, like I just gave them credit for, scrapping the flock safety partnership, which obviously is highly invasive. And listen, here's what it comes down to. You don't have human autonomy if someone can monitor you and mess with you if they don't like what you're doing or saying. I mean, these are also things that have microphones that can record from quite a distance you talking. So if your neighbor has a doorbell camera, it is likely listening to you, even if you live across the street. So you don't even have the privacy to have a conversation in confidence with your friends or family, unfortunately, unless somehow it's not turned on. But it likely is. So we can see during this time period, 2018 to 2023, they built extensive police partnerships with over 2,000 departments. Now, this is not me bashing anyone. I'm just telling you what's going on from these articles, mainstream articles for the most part. Now, this one is not. So it is based on their article. This is what they're saying. I'm not saying or verifying any of it. You can verify any of this to see if it's true or not. I am just simply reporting on what I'm reading about. So Ring discontinued the request for access directing police requests. Then 2025, the original founder returned to lead Ring. And then recently, I just did a video on Search Party, which is their new image tracking, which basically says if you lose a pet, they now can track it down for you. They can turn all of your neighbors into basically a search party surveillance network, and all of their doorbells work together to try and track down a pet. Sounds great, right? In theory, it sounds great. But then when you consider the facial recognition potential for things like that, and then maybe it could track people too. I mean, it could technically. I'm not claiming it is. I'm just saying it could. But there's something called familiar faces that allows it to. Here it is, 2025 December. They rolled out familiar faces, according to this article. Allegedly rolled out familiar faces, and it scans the face of everyone captured by your camera. Do you know how I know that? Because familiar faces will find people that you recognize and let you know who's at your door. That's convenient, right? But when you get convenience, sometimes you're sacrificing your freedom. And you really don't have true freedom without privacy. That's what this all comes down to, this whole channel. At least I cover other topics than privacy, but the reality is you don't have real democracy unless you have privacy. You do not have, the ability to protest without having potential for someone coming after you. Without privacy. You don't have free speech unless you can actually say something without having to give away your identity. And with all of these technological tools, do you really have it? Do you really have the right to speak up? Do you really have the right to speak up? And I want to remind you that even in the U.S. founding, and this is the legitimacy of what is going on in the country, is based on how constitutional it is. Without constitutionality, there is no legitimacy. Now, my point is that even during the founding of the U.S., there are documented cases where they're actually wearing scarves and things to cover their faces during protests. And they did that for very good reason, because people could seek revenge or retribution for people's beliefs, for people's democratic exercise of their rights. And that is what this comes down to. Do you have the freedom to control your own destiny? Do you have the freedom? Do you even have the ability to determine the future of your own country? Do you even have any form of democratic values if everything could be coming after you just because they don't like what you have to say. That's what I got today, guys. I just wanted to share some of these updates with you, and we'll be doing more tutorials soon. Just thought I'd share some articles I was reading about because, this is happening very fast, and I feel like it should be documented. I will see you guys in a video soon. Make sure to share the video, like it, and leave a comment. Let me know what you think, and I'll be back later with more on how to protect your security and privacy.